helped by Bitcoin? Well, commerce on the internet in 2008 required use of either a credit card or PayPal. Aside from small regional payment systems, there really wasn't anything else. So Bitcoin gave us the ability to pay people in places where maybe there were jurisdictional issues, or maybe there were issues with the size of payments. If anybody's ever tried to use a credit card, and I'm sure most of you have, there's like a $5 minimum for most things. So if you go to the gas station, let's say $5 or $10 minimum, like we won't let you pay with a card unless. Same thing with PayPal. PayPal has a pretty high minimum payment threshold, and it's something like $5 or $10, depending on what you're doing or if you're aggregating or whatever else. The other thing is, here's one. If anybody ever sends you a New York Times article and you're not a New York Times subscriber, you go to click the article and it says, hey, you need to subscribe. Don't worry, it's only like what, $3 a month? But then you click through and say, okay, I guess I'll sign up. And then you get that far and it says, yeah, but you need to pay for 12 months at a time. And so it's actually $36. And now you need my data, my credit card. You want me to log in with Google. So you want to track my Google profile across the internet and my credit card and all this stuff because somebody wanted to send me an article about, something that I only vaguely cared about in the first place. And I quit. I'm not paying $36 to read probably one article ever. Bitcoin is designed to reduce that minimum threshold for payment such that you don't have to do any of that. You can privately pay the New York Times 10 cents or 3 cents or whatever a New York Times article is worth. Maybe you can bid on it. With Bitcoin, you can actually bid on the value of the article based on its circulation and some other things. And he explains this. If you look at, if you read what's actually going on here, he explains cost of mediation increases transaction costs, limiting minimal practical transaction size and cutting off the possibility for small casual transactions. So he wanted to disrupt the very low end of the payment space in commerce on the internet. How many people feel like Bitcoin has solved that? One. Couple. Honestly, it hasn't. It should have, and there's reasons why it has not. That's primarily what my presentation will be about. So early days, here's a quote from Satoshi Nakamoto. When he released the white paper, he immediately had people arguing with him. In fact, the very first response to Satoshi releasing the white paper was, here's why this isn't going to work. Here's why everybody needs to, here's why it doesn't scale. There's a guy named James Donald, or a pseudonym named James Donald, who criticized Satoshi, basically telling him Bitcoin was a bad idea. Well, Satoshi laughed him off, and you can actually read all this. There's a lot of interesting things that you can still read that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote. Right here, he's talking about the current system where every user is a network node is not the intended configuration for large scale. That would be like every Usenet user runs their own server. The design supports letting users be users, et cetera, et cetera. But he's explaining big server farms. You see, he says big server farms in that second to the last line here. The rest will be client nodes that only do transactions. But if you talk to a Bitcoin guy, if you talk to somebody who calls himself a Bitcoin maximalist today, they will tell you, no, the system is designed for everybody to participate in infrastructure. You're supposed to run your own node. That's how you're sovereign, bro, typically. So who here likes to participate in the infrastructure of the internet systems that they use? Who runs an email server? You don't run your own email server? Weird. Okay. I don't either. Nobody does. Why would you? Even the companies that used to be in that business just outsource it to Google now because Google provides an extremely reliable product. Like, it goes down occasionally, but for all intents and purposes, email has been completely pushed off to people that are technical enough to manage it. And we don't have a trust problem because cryptography and digital signatures and all the other stuff that actually makes Bitcoin work, right? So it's very weird that the narrative has become that if you want to be a Bitcoiner, a real Bitcoin bro, that you need to participate in the infrastructure of the network in order to use Bitcoin in the first place. Satoshi Nakamoto, the designer of the system, the protocol, all this stuff, there's people that they will tell you it's brilliant. Man, he solved so many problems. He says it belongs in big server farms and you should just be a user. He specifically says you shouldn't run your own server to participate in Bitcoin. So what happened? How did this narrative change? Well, Satoshi Nakamoto got into a lot of arguments. The typical person who found Bitcoin fascinating was a crypto anarchist, which is cool. But they had very political views about what Bitcoin is and what it's for. And Satoshi Nakamoto did not like these things. One of the first major uses of Bitcoin was WikiLeaks. So WikiLeaks got canceled, deplatformed, because Julian Assange is not well liked by the big payment companies because Julian Assange is an anarchist disruptor. And it doesn't really matter how you feel about Julian. What matters is that he was canceled and that the Bitcoin community said, well, hey, Bitcoin can take donations for Julian Assange. We'll support WikiLeaks. That's great. Let's bring it on. Here's Satoshi Nakamoto saying, no, 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 no. Don't bring it on. This is bad. This is a bad thing. So here's Satoshi Nakamoto's words about why we don't want to do business with Julian Assange. It undermines our ability to do real payments, to do, 3 cents to the New York Times or these kind of things. These are the kind of things that Satoshi Nakamoto cared about. He cared about small payments in real business. He very specifically said, I don't care about your gray market, pseudo, maybe kind of criminal stuff that a lot of people really like about Bitcoin. These are your Silk Roaders and other people. So Satoshi did not want everybody to run their own node, and he didn't want Bitcoin to be used primarily for crime. Curious. So here is Gavin Andreessen, who became the lead developer of Bitcoin after Satoshi Nakamoto left. This is his leaving letter. Satoshi was so frustrated with the way that everybody wanted to redefine what Bitcoin was for, how to run it, who's in charge, all this nonsense that today everybody thinks is, man, that's Bitcoin. That's what Bitcoin's for. Satoshi hated this stuff. He hated it so much that he left. Here's his letter to Gavin Andreessen, basically saying, I wish you wouldn't keep talking about me as a mysterious, shadowy figure. The press just turns that into a pirate currency angle. So he does not like this notion of decentralized, we're fighting the man, we're trying to change, like we want to bring on this sort of anarcho something revolution. He really liked small payments, and he did not like the culture that people presume is Bitcoin culture. And that presumption about Bitcoin culture led to the creation of 20,000 altcoins and all this other nonsense. Remember, I asked who thinks Bitcoin is slow. We're going to get to that, I promise you. Bitcoin's not slow. It has been re-engineered to be slow. There we go. Satoshi got doxxed, hacked, blackmailed, extorted, starting in, as far as we know, publicly in 2014, we became aware that Satoshi Nakamoto was being very specifically blackmailed by some probably group of malicious actors on the internet. So his email got taken over, and then using his email, his SourceForge repo. Satoshi never used GitHub, by the way. Everybody presumes that Bitcoin belonged on GitHub. It didn't. Satoshi had a private SourceForge repo that got taken over. His P2P Foundation account got taken over. Various other accounts and forums and things got taken over. And we came to realize that, hey, maybe the guy pretending to be Satoshi Nakamoto after a certain point wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto at all. This thing changed, and we became aware of it in 2014, which was still, Bitcoin was a very small, insular community. People didn't realize what was going on. But Satoshi got taken over, and a lot of what we assume about Bitcoin is not what's assumed. But here's the official SourceForge from Gavin Andreessen, who was the guy who Satoshi, when he said he quit, he put Gavin in charge. Here's Gavin saying, hey, yeah, we just figured out Satoshi hasn't been in charge of this repo for a long time. Don't worry, we already moved it and all this stuff. So there's a lot of weird cloak and dagger stuff about what are Satoshi's actual words early on. Well, it's funny because after that point, 2014, we realized, like, hey, maybe the Satoshi that we thought we were talking to wasn't really him and all this other nonsense. And wouldn't you know it, at the same time, a bunch of money showed up in the Bitcoin space and started telling these other people, the anarcho developer types, hey, how would you like to be a professional developer? We can raise money from CME Ventures, AXA, MasterCard, New York Life. We'll start a conglomerate incubator and we'll call it Digital Currency Group. And you can work for us. Wouldn't that be great? We really love what we've done here with Bitcoin, these concepts, but wouldn't it also be cool if we created a giant token economy and exchanges and custodians and all these other things, all the things that today we think of as the quote unquote crypto economy, which is crumbling, by the way. Did Silvergate liquidate everything yet? They were talking about it last night. Are they done? So the crypto economy is crumbling, and it was built by the people that took over and said that Bitcoin was slow. Well, Bitcoin is not slow. Bitcoin is a protocol that is capable of exponentially more transactions than Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all of them put together. So Visa on a normal day can do about 6,000 transactions a second. The busiest day of the year, which is Black Friday, it hits about 65,000 transactions a second. It's a lot of payments, right? Well, Bitcoin BTC does about 7 transactions a second. Ethereum does about 15. On a really good day, you can see things like Polygon and some of these other, performant blockchains will do like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 transactions a second. So they could maybe, in theory, compete with Visa on a normal day, but they would completely collapse if it came to Black Friday. And so Bitcoin, the protocol, was split because all of this bickering about what Bitcoin is for turned into camps. It got political, just like you would expect it to when people disagree about what something is for and how to use it. And so we had the split in 2017 that created Bitcoin Cash, and that precipitated a split in 2018 that created BSV. And what these are is you take the Bitcoin network and database, and you have rules that allow one change versus another. BTC wanted to add extra levels of cryptography. They wanted to add I probably shouldn't get into the details, but they basically wanted to make sure that it was very, very slow and the bandwidth was very small so that you could be part of the infrastructure of Bitcoin. They wanted you to be the guy that runs their email server in their house for decentralization. That's how they want you to run Bitcoin. Well, if you thought Bitcoin was for payments and it was fast, you ended up being a Bitcoin casher or then you became a BSV person. Well, BSV today, which is just Bitcoin the way it was deployed in 2009, is capable of about 100,000 transactions a second. So that's more than Visa on Black Friday. It's the only blockchain that can do that. It's not even close, actually. So Bitcoin Cash, the other version, the other big block version of Bitcoin, is good for like maybe 150 or 200 transactions a second. So we're talking orders of magnitude more efficiency out of BSV. And what BSV is actually the smallest distilled down code base in Bitcoin. It was literally 95% trimming back all of the code that was done by people that were paid to code for about a decade because, hey, you've added a bunch of intertwined, interconnected interdependencies that make sure that it's not backward breaking, forward breaking, and all this stuff. But all that is just more nonsense to calculate. So you're calculating stuff instead of doing business, or you're participating in infrastructure instead of just running your life. And so that's a very weird thing that has happened, that now most people think Bitcoin is slow, when in reality, Bitcoin is actually the fastest, most efficient payments protocol on Earth today, and nobody knows it. Well, not nobody, but very few people know this. And so, well, that's a big opportunity, in my opinion. And I don't just say this theoretically. I've actually mined blocks. Like I said, or run a mining pool. We have mined blocks that are in the gigabytes, something that we were told was impossible, like math, science, all of this. Like that can't work, bro. Well, I've mined multiple blocks that are over 4 gigabytes, blocks that have 2.5 million transactions in them. Not just simple transactions. These are things that contain NFTs and various smart contracts, multi-sig, counterparty, blah, 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 blah. What is the average cost of each of these transactions? Who thinks Bitcoin's expensive to transact in? BTC is. It's, if you're trying to mint an ordinals NFT, it's a couple of bucks, sometimes 15 bucks, sometimes it's more. Well, in my biggest record breaking blocks ever mined with the Bitcoin protocol, the average price was 1/5000th of a penny per transaction. And so there's a very curious thing about Bitcoin, is that it is secured by economics. Let's see if I can scale here. So here's a comparison. Bitcoin has a finite supply. There's 21 million Bitcoins. They're broken into 100 million units. So there's 21 quadrillion coins in the system. The way they're issued is that every time there's a block, you get a reward. In 2008, it was 50 coins. Then 4 years later, it is cut in half to 25, and then 12 and a half. And we're in the 6.25 era. So every block has 6.25 Bitcoins in it. And at some point, there will be zero. But in 10 years from now, a little less than 10 years from now, there will be less than 1 coin in subsidy, which means we must figure out a way to replace that subsidy with more money. We need transaction fees. And so that requires one of two things. We either change the Bitcoin protocol such that we are creating more inflation, tail emission, people call it multiple things, or we need to raise the block size such that you can mine a 4 GB block or a 40 or a 400 GB block that is full of tons and tons and tons of paid transactions. And if we can do that, well, then Bitcoin is secure forever. And it is a global payment system that can replace Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Swift, Fedwire, and all the rest of it, and all of the other payment applications globally. I'm really just kind of talking American brands right now, but globally, there's a lot of payments going around. And truly, the only way to do it is using Bitcoin as a scalable, cheap to use, extremely reliable cash system. And then at that point, it should fade into the background. We shouldn't have to think about what Bitcoin is doing. And hey, do I need to go sync my node? Do I need to be in my closet working on things to wake up and do my business for the day? That doesn't make any sense. We already talked about Satoshi Nakamoto said it belongs in data centers. Users should just be users, and it scales infinitely. And so these are things that are controversial. People don't know. Was that the last slide? Oh, here we go. Very happy to take questions about anything really, but Bitcoin would probably make sense here.
So you talked about the history of BTC, BCH, and BSV. Can you talk a little bit about proof of stake systems like Ethereum and the others, and
Yep.
how you compare and contrast what you've just mentioned to those types of
Yes.
systems?
So proof of work systems are, a lot of people will tell you that a proof of work system is fundamentally inefficient, that the consensus is inefficient for all kinds of crazy reasons, and that Bitcoin is a dumb idea. We need to move to a proof of stake system because it doesn't consume so much electricity. And they make a couple of compelling arguments, but they're actually really shallow arguments when you break them down. The way that proof of work works is that we have this problem with trustworthiness in Bitcoin. Um, there are people that will watch my presentation and say, don't trust Kurt because he's making stuff up. Well, how do you know that I'm not making stuff up? Well, maybe we have a relationship. Maybe maybe you've worked with me in the past. Maybe my reputation precedes itself and you love everything that I stand for. But we all have these reputation systems for why should we trust information that we're receiving? What proof of work does is it creates a visible, discernible opportunity cost for the validation of information. So imagine if I did 20 minutes of jumping jacks in front of you all without saying anything before I gave my presentation. Well, first of all, you'd think I'm crazy and I'd be sweaty and out of breath and presentation wouldn't be very good. But if I told you right beforehand that, like, look, I'm so committed to my information, I'm going to sit here and jump around like a monkey, but I want you to sit and watch it and get past the crazy part because the information that I want to give you is worth me embarrassing myself to give it to you. So you would say, okay, Kurt worked really hard to get my attention. Perhaps I should listen. That's a very basic way to explain what proof of work is. You can also do something like, hey, you got to knock on my door 50,000 times or whatever. It's a little dance that you do in order to prove that your information is worth it. Now, in proof of work systems in Bitcoin, this is done digitally. So what you do is you get a gigantic hash table and say, hey, guess and check millions and millions of numbers until you find the valid hash. So this is what Bitcoin ASICs are doing, is saying, look, we're willing to just sit and say, is this the valid hash? No. Is this the valid hash? No. Is this the valid hash? No. It's the jumping jacks. And if you find the valid hash, you realize, okay, whoever validated this Bitcoin block really cared about validating this Bitcoin block well. And so we should trust that person at least a little more than somebody who had no extra cost to it. So that's what proof of work is. Proof of stake is the complete opposite. Proof of stake is, hey guys, I've got a lot of coins. You should trust me with your coins because I've got a lot of coins. It's basically what the bank says. This is what, Chase, you might bank at Chase because, hey, JP Morgan was a billionaire 100 years ago, right? Isn't that good? Should I trust him because of that? Like, well, maybe, but ultimately he's dead. They got a lot of buildings and whatever else. Like, Chase is Chase. That's a proof of stake concept. In proof of stake in crypto, it's, hey, I'm the biggest holder of Ethereum, and so I should validate Ethereum blocks, right? Well, it's kind of a perverse incentive model because whoever has the most Ethereum is then earning the most Ethereum at every block. And how do you compete with that? He doesn't have any extra opportunity cost. His opportunity cost was years ago. He beat you to the punch, and he is going to be a bigger and bigger aristocrat every day forever, and you'll never catch up. And so proof of stake systems create an aristocracy that just continues to create higher and higher first rungs. And then ultimately, is that a world we want to live in, where the person validating your information, your money, is the person that just got in earliest, and you can never ever catch up to them? Like that, in my opinion, is it makes everything else irrelevant. Like the fact that he doesn't have to compete to be the person validating my money and my data, it makes him intrinsically untrustworthy, as opposed to the guy who I know is really, really, really working hard every single block. And if he fails to do it, somebody better than him will replace him. So the king in a proof of work system is always the guy that worked the hardest. And that's crucial. It is a crucial aspect of having valid data and good money.
And this question comes up a lot too, is that on the proof of work side, right? When you mentioned beating you to the punch, right now it's super hard to run a mining operation, right? It's dominated by publicly traded companies that have access to cheap capital and resources together, hardware.
Mhm.
With that, what's your thought process on that? A and B. The second question comes up is, you have these big mining pools that you could collude, right? And then it'll be tough to get the resources necessary to beat them at the proof of work side because they have so much hardware. It takes a lot of time to set up a new data center, et cetera.
Sure. So just like anything, no system is perfect. And actually, being a publicly traded mining company has made it that people don't actually have to be good at proof of work, because their stock went up in value. And so they're actually using their stock as a proof of stake underpinning of their proof of work system, and saying, hey, we're really good at proof of work. When in reality, they're all going bankrupt now because they didn't actually know what they were doing. None of them did. And so humans have this notion that hey, proof of work is bad, or Bitcoin doesn't really work. And so then that misunderstanding of what the system is for leads to, hey, this is a really good opportunity to make dollars. So buy a marathon stock or whatever. And then it's created this gigantic perverse incentive that is now collapsing. Bitcoin hasn't collapsed. Bitcoin hasn't actually failed. But these people that are pretending, that are being a fake, imagine if I'm sitting here saying, hey, these are jumping jacks. Like, I'm not actually doing jumping jacks. So this is very easy for me to say, oh, yeah, I could do 10,000 of those. Well, of course I can. I'm not actually exercising. And so the problem is there's this democratization versus high specialization concept. So like we saw, like, do you want to run an email server? Is the internet better if we all run an email server? I think the answer is no. I think the economy has told us that the answer is no. And I think it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Like, do I want it to be cheap and easy to validate data? It depends on the data. So if it's the data that we're all using for everything, then no, I don't want some malicious actor to be able to very easily spin up 50,000 fake validators and say, yep, here's the truth. And like, oh shoot, we got undermined, and it only cost them like $1 million to undermine the whole system. I want it to cost a lot of money and be very competitive to attempt to undermine the system. It's part of the security model. So it's one of those arguments. I mean, this is like capitalism versus communism. Like, which is better? Well, it's a moral question. It becomes a lot of other things. It's not just the economics. It's not just the system. It really comes down to a philosophy about what is value, how do we achieve it, and then how do we maintain it after we've achieved it. And in my opinion, it demands that we are fundamentally competitive. I can trust somebody who is willing to spend all of their money to secure a system, maybe at their own detriment. Somebody who's willing to do that, risk their own butt, not with the stock and all this stuff. That's somebody who I'd be willing to trust. Be like, look, if he fails, he loses everything. He's obviously actually committed to the truth. So, but it's a value judgment thing. Ultimately, there are people all over the world that think communism is awesome, and like, I don't have to work with them. So, any other questions? Yes.
Paola?
Hi, Kurt. How are you?
Good.
I find your talk very interesting, and I agree with everything you have said. And I'm very familiar, with Bitcoin and the difference between BTC and BSV. There's no question about, the lack of scalability, in other blockchains. And that's a big concern for me as an investor, and I was in technology before. And what you talk about, in processing data and the amount of time that it takes is insane, because compared to high frequency trading, which you can process petabytes of data in fraction of a second,
Yep.
there's no comparison at all. Now, my question for you is, how can we bring BSV into the mainstream and make people understand the value of it? Because that's one of my biggest concerns and also challenges, as someone who believes in the technology and understands the underneath technology and the stack of the programming language that Bitcoin uses. How do you see that happening?
Well, that's a great question. It's also a really complicated and philosophical one. Bitcoin, the problem that people think Bitcoin solves for, people actually got very lucky that COVID happened on the store of value inflation hedge side, because wouldn't you know it, the world decided to print trillions and trillions of extra dollars into the world, and that played right into the narrative of, hey man, there's only 21 million Bitcoins, and if you have them, they're going up in value. So they went up in value because people got scared and they're looking at the dollar and saying, hey, this is crazy, and this crazy pyramid scheme dollar thing is turning out to be exactly what the Austrian economists and the small blocker Bitcoin people said it would. And so that played into their hands, and it played really well. And unfortunately, with things like a global pandemic and then people not sure, is it real, or are we all being screwed with? Is this a giant psyop? That's not good for business. BSV is very business focused. So BSV thrives if people need global frictionless payments and big growing companies and extremely secure data. That's crucial. But we spent 2-ish years all being really worried the world was going to collapse, and there's not a lot of people trying to build businesses there. Now we're seeing that, obviously, we're all in a room here together, not wearing our masks and whatever else. And so I think people are going to try to pivot here and say, okay, hey, we actually need to get back to business at some point, or else the economy will collapse. And so if you have a huge need for frictionless payments, cheap, reliable, global payments, or extremely secure distributed data, BSV has no competitor. Not even close. We are orders of magnitude better than the second best solution. And so if you have crucial records management, or something that something where you're increasing the value of your data just because it's dealt with in this way, or if you need to attach money to data globally and that creates a ton of value for your business, we're the only game in town. We're the only people that have done that R&D, and we're ready right now. There is no roadmap. There's no whatever. But really, the way that happens is hard work. Somebody's got to get out there and be a serious salesman, start a business, and offer these services to big medical companies or big data companies or whatever. People aren't just going to say, hey, I don't know, we did a little bit of research and maybe BSV is the solution. Now we're going to build a stack. Like, sorry, go get some investment, talk to Zach and some of the other people here at Unbounded Capital and say, hey, I've got a really good idea and a really good team. And I think we can make this successful. Can I get some startup capital? Well, go start a thing that sells frictionless payment or really, really reliable data to the economy. These are the biggest opportunities in the world. These are massive growth industries. And so if you can't go get a customer with this tool and this opportunity, then go start a sports bar or something, because that's also cool. But it's massive. There's so much opportunity here. So that hard work. Hard work is the answer.
So we got time for a couple more questions. Samira, in the pink blazer. And yeah, Paolo, we're going to basically be answering that question for the entirety of the day. So you heard Kurt's point of view, but we're hearing a bunch of others over the coming hours.
Yeah.
That's my follow-up is to that question. If I could wave a magic wand and choose 1 or 2 or 3 levers to pull, what industries what do you think will be the tipping point?
So I'm from the cybersecurity industry. I think when you look at the opportunity in cybersec for securing data, the average hack costs a company hundreds of millions of dollars to mitigate. And it's because we have all these disconnected, crappy systems, and you have all this weird data interchange stuff. Like, hey, we got to get data from server A to server B, and there's $1 billion in the middle of those two things to steal. Well, if you give millions of people on Earth the opportunity to attempt to get in the middle of it, they will get in the middle of it. The biggest companies in the world, the most secure companies in the world, have all been hacked. And we also know that our data is being used all over the place. Like when you say, hey, should we join a soccer club? And then Instagram is pushing you like, hey, here's your local soccer club for days after, right? Your data is being digested by somebody all the time. And you have no idea how much money they're making on it from you. And you're not benefiting from it at all unless you like being advertised to. So with Bitcoin, with this opportunity, you can optionally encrypt and decrypt every single byte of data globally so that maybe your data is being paid for by the people that are digesting it and consuming it and profiting from it as well.
But I want you to answer like exactly if you could make any 3 humans on Earth adopt, who like what industries is it or who is it?
I would talk to FireEye, which is the largest cybersecurity firm in the world. I would talk to Twitter, which isn't actually a social network, it's a data mining operation. And then I would talk to whoever the largest medical group in the world is, because people's medical records are also a really good way to screw with them or keep them sick or whatever else. So if this data could be secured and repurposed in ways that puts the consumer back in control, and also the fact that you can prove that you're in control, not just, hey, don't worry, terms of service say you're fine, but literal cryptographic proof that I have not been screwed. I mean, those we're talking trillions of dollars of opportunity there with just those things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kurt?
Kurt, can you maybe just touch upon the differences, the architectural differences between account-based versus cash UTXO or cash-based?
Yes. So Ethereum and most blockchains that get used today for all kinds of things are account-based. So this is like PayPal. So when you make a PayPal transaction, there's not like some exchange happening on the background. It's literally just your PayPal account deducts a number and puts it over here. This is how Ethereum works. So there's not there is not a individual coin at every level that is being moved provably. It is your Ethereum account that is being debited here and credited there. And it's fine, except that it doesn't scale because it's computationally very inefficient. And even like the best versions of these things. So if you look at like the way that Avalanche has kind of spun that idea and done some interesting things, or Polygon, or some of these other things that add like an L2 aspect to Ethereum, like they do get a lot of extra efficiency from that system, but it was so inefficient to begin with that we're just not talking about the magnitude of scale for anything other than a niche. The way that Bitcoin works, it's called a UTXO system. So it's unspent transaction outputs. It's kind of like you're literally physically moving coins. So $1 is 100 pennies. And if somebody wants 50 cents out of me and I only have $1, I'm going to hand you the dollar and you're going to give me 50 pennies back. Let's just say it's pennies. You give me 50 pennies back. Structurally, Bitcoin is competitive at every level. So there's parallelization of transaction validation. Whereas on Ethereum-based systems, because they're account-based, every single node on the network has to pass every threshold together, which means the network can only be as efficient as the least efficient node on the network. And then that doesn't scale. There's no competitive aspect to making it better in a pinch, which is why every once in a while, Ethereum and all these other EVM-based chains, they just break, or they're just, oh, we need to reboot. We're resyncing the whole network, or that kind of thing. And it's just not conducive to scale. It needs to be fundamentally re-architected if it wants to scale. But the way it should be fundamentally re-architected is just ignore it, use the Bitcoin UTXO system, because all you need to do is call Amazon and say, hey, give me 50 more computers. Bam, we're flowing again. Everything's good. So that's the architectural difference.
So we got time for one more question for Mr. Kurt Wuckert Jr. Okay, Alex Agut over there in the black blazer.
Hey, Kurt.
Hey.
So I read the white paper, obviously, And our business Handcash has seen the white paper kind of as a recipe.
Sure.
And if you follow the recipe, I think it's very clear what it says, right? And it's a very so. I think my question is, why do you think the white paper has been so open to interpretation by so many groups? And it seems like everyone, and even billionaires or very smart people, seems like they have a totally different interpretation of what it says. What do you think that is?
How many sects of Judeo-Christian religion exist in the world? A lot, right? And it's funny because we've had the founding documents of these things for, well, in the case of Judaism, 5,000 or 6,000 years, and then Christianity's 2,000 years, and then we got the other variants, and then you got hey, are Mormons Christians too? And it's like, well, kinda, but they disagree with this thing. And ultimately, people are tribal. We love what we love about our tribe, and then if you play the drums wrong, I'm going to start a whole new religion. And so we've got issues where people like, no, this is the thing that really matters to me, and I cannot get over it, and I can't be friends with you, and we have to separate, and we're going to have a war for 1,000 years about it. This is just people. The problem is humanity. The problem is we even take certain words to mean different things in different contexts. And so when Satoshi Nakamoto wrote what, in my opinion, is a very clear and very simple recipe for what is Bitcoin, well, of course, people that have a different view on the meanings of words or sentences or paragraphs, they're going to form a splinter group, and that splinter group might exist forever. What religion has taught us is that lots of people can't get along, but lots of people can also get along even though they disagree. And ultimately, proof of work as a system is a way to say, you know what, I can trust this guy even if I disagree with some of his fundamental values. If he's creating value in a way that I can prove is real, he actually cares, maybe I disagree, but he's very authentic, then we can all cooperate. So I think, this is another, it's a human problem. It's a philosophical problem, but we can get past it, I think. So that's my thought.
Let's give it up for Kurt Wuckert Jr.
Thank you.
Get past it, I think. Strong words.